Good evening. 1 2 1 2. Just let me know if you can hear me. That'd be great. I should probably just disable Discord and do all this in the YouTube chat, shouldn't I? So yeah, just I think I've put the links out everywhere that they need to be. So I think I saw a good evening. I just said good evening to myself because it's on the other window. That's how noobish I am at YouTube. I thought someone had somehow managed to get onto the stream with me, and I was like, good evening. Interestingly, there is quite a bit of time between myself talking and then receiving something back. So yeah, that's interesting. Okay, give it a couple more minutes. Hopefully you can see the animated logo and all that kind of stuff. Maybe I need a holding screen for live in 5 or a little countdown type thing for the next one. Oh, hang on a second. Oh, awesome, right. So I can see the YouTube chat as well. This is my first time using OBS, so yeah, that's awesome. Pretty pleased with it. Okay, I'll minimize all of this stuff. Okay, yeah, again, I'll just wait another minute for people to clock in, as it were. I think I tweeted it out. It's just way better that we can just record it straight onto YouTube like this, obviously. Saves a ton of work in the background, mainly being done by Potato. Okay, we'll crack on anyway, and I think there's another space or something going on at the moment. Looked like I just saw it. Who was it who tweeted it? I can't remember who tweeted it, but it looked like a big one. So, okay, if there's anything in particular you want me to talk about this evening, then just drop it in the YouTube chat. I won't be looking at the Discord chat, so just drop it in the YouTube chat. And what we're going to be doing is we're going to be doing a little bit of 3D modeling, just talking a bit about 3D modeling and getting assets into games and that sort of workflow, all that kind of stuff. Well, rendering images, rendering specifically, and the times related to rendering are one of the primary reasons that I went into real-time development way back in the day. And that was before we had faster computers. You know, that was back when, goodness, when I was starting out, we were running Silicon Graphics workstations, and they were, I don't know, maybe 233 megahertz or something. And then I upgraded to a 450, and then my next upgrade was it was an AMD Thunderbird, and you could overclock them. These are all single core processors, of course, and you could overclock them, and it was I think it was a 1400 megahertz, and the AMDs at the time, like, you could overclock them, but they weren't, you know, like, formally letting you do it. But all you needed to do to overclock them was get a graphite pencil and draw a line between these two connection points on the top of the CPU, and it would unlock the BIOS settings to overclock. And so I had my thing running in like open-sided case with fans on, and it was like about, I don't know, about 1900, I think. It never got it up to 2 gig, but pretty fast back then. Okay, so we're going to be doing some 3D modeling, and obviously, like, if you want me to talk about anything, to drop it in the YouTube chat, that would be great. So I'm going to be using Maya, which is, I've been using it since the beginning of learning 3D modeling. So I'm going to be doing this all in Maya. And what I'm going to try and do this evening is I'm going to try and model out a couple of little assets for the scene. In this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to demonstrate some of the benefits of the modular way in which we work with games. This is not specific to Knitties, it's just standard practice with games and most creative processes. And we're going to be adding some bases to these flowers so they don't just stick straight into the ground. And we'll probably use the same assets to fill out a few other areas. And we're going to be using obviously 3D modeling and some deformers to do that. But we're also going to be creating what we call prefabs in Unity and discussing like the benefits of doing that. Okay, so let's see where we're up to at the moment. This is the version that was given out to boosters last week, I think it was. So it's not a completed version. Obviously, none of this is complete, just to clarify, if anyone's watching this and is new. And this Knitty today, look at this Knitty, this cheeky little Knitty, ruining all the flowers. So this is in an honorary mention on stream to one of the fantastic Knitties community members who bought today a black label for, I think it was 10,000 ADA, which is amazing. I won't say their name on stream because I haven't got permission to do so, but thank you very much for supporting the project, and yeah, just really awesome to see one of these black labels back on the market and being picked up at that kind of price. So that was really fantastic to see. And so yeah, this evening we'll be playing back as an approximation of that Knitty in the Knitty world. Okay, so I'm going to go into Maya and we'll just start building stuff out. Now, obviously I'm using Maya, but these techniques, they apply to pretty much any modeling software. So one of the things I always say to my students is try to be software agnostic, right? You don't want to be limiting yourself to the software that you use. I'm just going to lower my input levels because I think my mic was maybe peaking out a little bit. Okay, hopefully that's a bit better. So all the stuff I'm going to use here is available in any 3D modeling package that you might choose to use, whether it's Blender, 3ds Max, or whatever. You don't see 3ds Max being used very much these days, but there are still studios that use it. Okay, so what we're going to be doing is creating just a leaf, just a single leaf, or specifically like the kind of leaf that you see at the base of a flower, like marigolds coming out of the ground or whatever, or tulips or that sort of thing. Yeah, that kind of leaf that just exists at the bottom of a plant. So to do this, there are many ways of modeling things in 3 dimensions. There are so many ways of modeling things in 3D. Some people start with cubes all the time. That's a personal preference that I have, is I like to start with cubes. But yeah, just I'm doing it this way doesn't make it the best way. What I tend to think about is, before I start modeling, is what is the best place to start from that's going to save me time in the long run. So in this case, a leaf form is generally like a round, elongated oval shape. So I'm going to start with a cylinder, and you don't need to start with a cylinder, you can start with anything. But this is going to give me a bunch of topology right away, which is kind of broadly speaking correct. So what I'm going to do is just scale this up a bit so that I don't have to keep zooming in for you. This means it's going to be huge when I import it, but that doesn't matter too much for this purpose. So when I create a cylinder, you're going to have a ton of options. And in Maya, these are displayed in the poly cylinder node. So I can control how many subdivisions I want in the axis. So this is how subdivided it is around here. And I tend to go for about 12. What you always, generally what you want to do is make sure when you're working with cylinders, unless you've got a specific reason not to do this, is make sure that each quadrant has got the same amount of edges in it. So you can see with 12 divides by 4, right? You get 3, and you can see there's 3 faces in the top here, okay, and 3 edges, 3 faces around each side. That makes things a hell of a lot easier if you're making complex forms with the cylinder. If I chose something like, 10 does not divide into an integer when divided by 4. So what happens is you get one of these edges parallel to an axis, and then on this side you've got the edges being slightly perpendicular to the axis. So yeah, generally you want to work so that you've got the same amount of faces in each quadrant, generally. Okay, and because I have a very specific way of working, a very specific workflow, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add subdivisions in the cap. And what that does is it just gives me what we call a face loop or an edge loop. This is technically not an edge loop. This bit here is an edge loop. That bit there is an edge loop. This is a face loop. And it's just the way that I work. I like to have that on as many of my forms as possible. There is sometimes a bit of an obsession around these, which is kind of not always necessary, but essentially they help you when you're modeling. Right, so with all of that done, what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to delete most of the cylinder because I don't need it. I just need this top bit. And what I'm also going to do is I'm going to delete all these faces in the middle there. And I'm going to scale this up so that this is quite close to the edge like this. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to start morphing this form. Don't worry about the gap in the middle, I'm going to fill that in a minute. I'm going to try and morph this form so that it approximates roughly the sort of form that one of these leaves might take. So you can see like that is, like if the leaf was flattened out, that would probably be quite close, I suppose. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to start manipulating these vertices. Vertices are essentially like vector, they're points in space, they're points in 3-dimensional space. And they are the base component of a 3D mesh. So this mesh is made up of vertices, edges, and faces. And the vertices are kind of like the base component, the most basic component of the 3D model, essentially. So you can just move these around like this. I mean, all of these things, these basic principles of 3D modeling exist in any program. So this is perfectly what I'm doing here it's not advanced, but it's certainly perfectly achievable in other software. Okay, so what I'm trying to do is just average out these forms a little bit, just create this kind of general smoothness going around the form. So I'm just moving this around so there's no abrupt changes in direction of these edges, essentially. Like so, something like that. And one thing we've got to consider here as well is like this has got like sharp edges around the outside, right? So you can see you've got these corners in the form, and we can reduce those, like we can smooth this out and make it like nice and round. But if we smooth this out, it's going to increase the amount of data that is required to display it or to make the form. So for example, at the moment, you may not be able to read it, but in my HUD up here, this object is reading as having 24 triangles, which is the primary unit of measure when we're measuring polygon counts. We generally want to keep things as low poly as possible unless we have a very specific reason for like making them high poly, such as if we're doing displacement or something. We're not doing that with these. So what I've got to do is I've got to decide how big are these leaves ever going to be when they're displayed in the game, right? How big will they ever be? Like on the screen, will they be that big? Can I still see the sharp edges at this distance? You know, so I've got to make these kind of decisions as I model. In this case, it might be beneficial to smooth this once, but the triangle count is actually going to, it's not going to double if I smooth it once, it's going to quadruple. So this suddenly becomes 100 faces, but then I've also got to fill this in, right? So that's actually going to be more. So I've got to decide how many faces is this leaf going to be worth? Like, what's my budget for this tiny leaf that is going to be at the bottom of all of these flowers? Yeah, how much am I actually going to be able to see it and pay attention to it? And is it worth smoothing it out? Okay, so let's build out the rest of this. So I'm just going to grab this edge loop inside here. And I'm going to go mesh fill. And this polygon at the moment is what we call an n-gon. So this face is made up of more than 4 sides, and we don't want that, so we need to fix it. A lot of the time, n-gons are actually okay. Like if I was just going to leave this here like this and not bend it or do anything with it, this n-gon would be fine. Like there wouldn't be any issues, or it's highly unlikely that there would be any issues. But it's good practice just to close it off. So what I'm doing here is I'm just turning this into quadrilaterals like this. So now that n-gon is now in quadrilaterals. Okay, it's just made up quadrilaterals. And what I'm also going to do now is I'm just going to move these verts around. In fact, there's a better way of doing this. And straighten up these edges a touch. And it might be that I need to move these out to kind of smooth out the form a little bit as well. Okay, something like that I think is good. Yep, okay. Right, next up, what I want to do is I want to give this form some thickness. Okay. Actually, I might bend it first. I might do the bending first and then do the thickness later, because it's always easier to bend something that's flat. So at the moment, this is just like a flat surface, right? Obviously. And what I'd like to do is be able to give it some thickness. Some gesture, a little bit of a bend. So to do that, and this is going to allow me to show you another problem with this, or another concern, or another consideration that we need to resolve. To do this, I'm going to deform it. Deformers are standard utilities or tools within any 3D software. So I'm going to go nonlinear. This is a nonlinear deformer, and it's a bend deformer. Okay, so up here, with my bend deformer, it allows me to essentially bend this line, but you can see nothing's happening at the moment, and that's because my bend deformer is facing the wrong way. So I'm just going to rotate it around like this, and now you can see I can bend this. Okay. However, you will also see that it is restricted in terms of how it bends by the resolution of this mesh. Okay. So this is another reason why you might want to increase the topology or smooth a mesh so that you can get a better looking deformed mesh, essentially. So I'm thinking maybe it might be worth smoothing this out. I mean, the Knitties world is kind of smooth, so yeah, we might want to change that out. So I'm just gonna, I should just be able to smooth it even though it's bent. Okay, so we just smoothed that, and you can see it's much rounder now. It just has a much better feel to it. Okay. What I might do though is actually reapply this, I think. I'm not entirely sure yet. Let's try and go with it. Okay. So what I want to do is I want to create this kind of curved leaf effect, and this is kind of doing a pretty good job actually. This is pretty nice. I'm going to need to play around with it a bit, but by and large, I'm relatively happy with this. And what I can also do is I can spin this around, and you can kind of like get these slightly different effects by doing this if you wanted to. I'm not overly concerned. Moving it will actually have a bigger effect, like because then you can start getting slightly different forms on the leaf like this. But I want one that kind of curves over reasonably well. It's fairly robust, so I'm thinking this is the base of the leaf and this is the end of the leaf like that. Okay, let's go with that. So at this point, I'm happy with it. So what I'm going to do is I am going to go on to edit and delete by type history. And what this is going to do is it's going to remove the bend handle that was there previously. Okay, I'll just drop into chat and see if there's any questions. No. Okay, awesome. So, right, next up, this is one-sided at the moment. This doesn't have an underside, which means that when we display this in the game, this bit here, the underside or the back face, will not be visible. So what we need to do is we need to give this some thickness. Okay, I'll just jump into Discord, see if there's any chat going on. We've got a shell post in chat. Just delete that. We're all distracted and they're taking the opportunity. Someone's just posted a picture of how much Maya costs. Yeah, Maya's expensive. It's like, you know, the top end 3D modeling animation tool, right? So, or the top end general purpose tool. It is expensive. It's free if you're a student, though. Okay, so let's extrude this. How many people are going to comment that, did you know Blender's free? So we're going to give this some thickness. Okay, and just, this is made of, I imagine these could be made of felt maybe. So they do need to be thick-ish because these are only small in the context of the Knitties world, right? So they need to have a decent amount of thickness to them. Probably that will do. And also what I'd like to do is just round off these corner edges here. So I'm going to add a bevel to these. And I'll probably add, I've got to keep an eye on this triangle count. I'm just going to go with this like that. So we've got this relatively smooth object currently. It's looking pretty good. Like, I don't need to do much else with this. I can use it in a variety of ways as well. So yeah, I think that that's a good starting point. So next thing that I want to do is I am going to position this as close with the base as close to world 0 as possible. World 0 is like this intersection of different axes. Okay, and what I'm going to do is currently the pivot point is located over here for this object. So whenever I rotate it, it's going to rotate around there. What I want to do is relocate the pivot point. So in Maya, that is you press D, and then we can just snap this to the grid. And then we're just going to go on to modify, freeze transformations, edit, delete by type, history. And we're ready to do a little bit of UV mapping. At this point, I am going to save this. I'll save this as flower leaf. Okay. All right. So I don't think there's anything else in chat at the moment. So next thing we need to do is, although one of my shading methods doesn't require the use of UV mapping, I would argue it's good practice to actually UV map stuff. So we're going to do a bit of UV mapping. I have done this on stream before. So let's go. So the first thing I want to do is divide this up into a couple of different pieces. It actually looks like it's really well divided already, and all I need to do is unfold it. In fact, I could probably get away with that, but I don't want to get away with that. Let's redo it from scratch. Let's delete what we've got and redo it from scratch. So actually, I don't need to delete what I've got. I can just create some new ones. So I'm going to go into my UV editor, and in my UV toolkit, I'm just going to hit the planar creation mode, and that's going to give me some new UVs. And you'll see that in this case, from the top, the UVs look pretty good. They stretch as they go down the form at the side. Here, on these edges, they are completely stretched. And then underneath, they are backwards. So you see this U followed by the hyphen. That is the correct direction. And this is the incorrect direction because the hyphen is before the U. Okay, so I've got to do a little bit of correcting here. This will actually be highlighted here as well. So if I just turn on this blue and red view, then you'll see blue is good, red is not. Okay, unless it's Astro, of course, because Astro is red and everyone loves Astro in the Mark III pattern. So yeah, I guess red is good in some cases. So what I'm going to do now is I need to separate these out essentially so that I can flip these red faces around because they're facing the wrong way. So the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to pick up one of my edge loops. Another benefit of using edge loops is you can really quickly select an edge that goes all the way around the object. I would argue actually that this edge in here is probably a better one to grab, but we'll go with this. So I've selected that edge loop. I'm going to go into my UV editor and I'm going to cut this UV. So now my UV is split into a top and a bottom. And what I would like to do is unfold both of these like so. And I want to have them facing the correct orientation. If this is the base, then that would normally be located at the bottom here in this first UV square or UDIM. And then the end would be at the top. Okay, so I'm just going to follow that accepted standard for this type of object. Here it's a little bit harder. I'm going to have to rotate this one around. Yeah, that's good. So I'm looking at, it's barely visible on here, I can appreciate that, but I'm looking at the U and the minus. I make sure the U is in the correct direction, it's oriented the right way, and the hyphens in the right orientation as well, or on the right side of the U. And now what I need to do is ensure that when I resize these, they retain the correct textile density, or relative to one another, they retain the same textile density. And this is the density of the texture, or this grid pattern, on the mesh. Okay. And the way I'm working here is very deliberate. The way that I'm working on the Knitties world, I don't need, for those of you who are into do 3D and for any artists looking at this in the future, I don't need to make everything in the game world the same textile density, because we're using like a really modular material workflow that's using a ton of procedurals that I've demonstrated on previous streams. I don't actually need to mess around with trying to match up all of the textile densities. What I'm actually more concerned with is ensuring that the ends of things are in the right, go all the way up to the top of the UDIM, and the bottoms of things go all the way down to the bottom, so that I can manipulate them using vertex manipulation on a shader. So that's what I'm really concerned with. Okay, so we're pretty good here. Now there's one more thing that I would like to do that I've just noticed that would benefit this form, I think. And what I'm going to do, save it, is I'm just going to put this, I'm going to grab the move tool, I'm going to pick up this middle edge loop. I'm also going to adjust my soft selection settings here like this. Let's see what this does. I'm just going to adjust that bit in the middle. Down or up? Actually, down's kind of cool. I think down's probably the way to go, right? Looks a bit like a tongue. I think that's possibly the way to go. I don't know. That looks a bit softer. That looks a bit more realistic. So I'm just adding, oh, it looks like a cobra or something. So I'm just adding that kind of little bit of gesture reform, essentially. Okay. I think that's probably the way to go. But again, yeah, this is for Knitties world, so things are not realistic. They're made of felt and they're made of wool, so you know. Okay, so next up, I'm just going to delete all by type history again. Just always good practice to get rid of that. Let's give this an appropriate name. So it's currently called P cylinder 1. I'm going to call this flower because it's to do with flowers, leaf, and this is the first one I've made, so I'm going to call this 01. Okay, flower, leaf, 01. And is there anything else I need to do with this? I don't think so. I think we're good to go. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring this straight into Unity. So I'm going to export this. And I've got a folder called 3D Assets. So I'm just going to call this the same thing again, flower, leaf, 01. And now if I jump into Unity, then in my 3D Assets folder, I've now got this object called flower leaf 01. Okay. And when I bring this out, like you can see, it's kind of coming out relatively well sized. Yeah, it's not too bad actually. So yeah, I think we'll probably go with that. That's not the size I want it to be. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a small form with these leaves. Let's do it over here somewhere. I'm going to do it on a grid spot. That makes things life a little bit easier. So what I want to do is when I'm working, the Knitties is a modular world and it is constructed based on grid points. So what I want to do is I want to be snapping things to the grid. So what I'm going to do with this object is I'm going to change its movement or its transform to global transform. And that's going to enable me to turn on this snap setting, which is going to allow me to snap this to the grid like that. Okay, and you remember my pivot point where I moved it to? That's what it's using for this. So what I'm going to do now, ignore my scene disorganization, by the way. This is, you know, we're in look dev at the moment, so I'm not too concerned about scene organization at this point. Right, so I'm going to grab this, I've duplicated it, and let's just spin a few duplicates out and see where we're at. Okay, like this. Okay, so we've got this form so far. And what I'd like to do is like create some variation in these leaves. It's looking kind of nice actually at the moment, just like this, right? But I want to create a little bit of variation here. So what I would like to do is I'd like to be able to rotate each of the leaves now individually. But the problem is at the moment is like, because I'm working in global transformation mode, the manipulators are always oriented towards the axes, right? But what I can do is just flip this back to local, and you'll see now each one is located around the orientation of each leaf, and now I can do stuff like this. So I can kind of like pull these up individually. I can also move them around, so I'm like, oh, actually maybe just move some of them about a little bit to create a bit of variation. I'm not too bothered if they kind of hit each other, but I just want a little bit of variation going on, really. Okay, another thing I can do is, now that I'm put it into object mode, I can grab all of them and I can do that. So you get that kind of, the leaves are sort of overlapping each other a little bit, like a propeller, I guess. And yeah, you can kind of manipulate them all at once like this. So you can see, like, out of that one leaf, I've suddenly got all these potential like flower forms possibly. So that's kind of cool. I'm seeing right now that one of these is, or some of these are slightly out of sync with the others. So I'm just gonna, you could do this mathematically, but I don't want it to be mathematical, just eyeball it, really. Okay, so let's get some of these things just looking a little bit, get a bit more variance in there essentially. Let's grab that and put that down like so. That's kind of interesting, I suppose. Like this. Let's grab all of these. It might be that I completely changed my mind on this and I just like, yeah, actually I want this to be like regularly distributed, so they're all distributed in the same way. But I quite like this kind of approach. And we can obviously all scale some of these differently because the leaves might not all be the same size. So let's just do a bit of that. As well. Something like this. Yeah, that's kind of interesting, I suppose. Maybe that actually does need to go up a little bit. Like this. Okay, so we've got this kind of form. But yeah, you can keep working away at this and keep noodling away at this. I'm just going to revert back to how it was, which is just this very standard distribution. To get this absolutely correct, you calculate, like what you do is, I'll show you actually. What you would do is, let's just reset all these rotations to 0. What you would do is you'd find, right, so we want 5, let's say we want 5 leaves. I don't know why I'm picking 5, but let's say we want 5. And you could say, right, what's 360 divided by 5? All right, 72, right? So what I can do is, if I duplicate this and I can type in 72, then I can duplicate this. And it would be 144. Do the same thing again. Add 72. So that would be what, 2? Oh goodness. 216, is it? That looks correct, I guess. And then maybe I should make my life easier and do this one as like minus 72, like this. Oh, that was minus 71, minus 72. Okay, I am good at maths normally, just not on stream. Okay, so that makes it like exactly, right? Okay. And then let's apply a material to this. And I've actually got some felt-like materials that I've created already. So actually that isn't one. There we go. So we've got like these felt type materials, and this has been created specifically for the size that they're probably going to be in the game. So it looks ridiculously like big. It looks too big at the moment, but I wouldn't worry too much about that because we're going to scale these down in a bit. So okay, so we've got this basic set of leaves. You can kind of see from a distance, you get that kind of sheen of the felt now. Okay, right, next up is, now that I've created these things, I'm not too worried about the clipping underneath because you don't really see that in the world because we're always viewing them from above. So next up is I need to grab these, I need to turn these flower leaves into what we call a prefab. And prefabs are really fantastic. Essentially what a prefab means is it's a prefabricated asset. Anything that's blue here is a prefabricated asset. And what I need to do to get me started on this is I'm going to create an empty game object. Okay, so this is just an empty object. It's called game object. And I'm going to snap this to the grid here, like that. So this is right on that grid point that I created all these flower leaves at. And I'm going to select all my flower leaves and I'm going to drag and drop them into that game object. And I'm going to call this flower underscore leaf form 1. Okay, so this game object, which is an object in the scene, is now called flower leaf form 1. And what I'm going to do is I've got a folder called prefabs, and there's a folder there called flowers, and I'll create another folder in here called I suppose I should probably call it bases. And I'm going to drag and drop this into that folder. And what this means now is in my scene, I can just delete this. But it now means that I can drag this out as many times as I want, essentially from the assets directory. And what it also means is that I can change this prefab by double clicking on it. And let's say that I wanted to move one of these leaves over here for whatever reason, and it will affect all of them. Okay, so I've now got control over every aspect essentially of this this prefab. Okay, of everything that's made up of this prefab. Okay, so that's why we use prefabs, so we can create instances of our objects. Right, so what I'm going to do now is I need to figure out where to put these flower leaf prefabs. I want every flower to have a prefab, but I don't want to have to place them individually, right? You know, that would just take me ages. So all of these flower groups are actually prefabs themselves and are child instances of other variants. The main master prefab is this orange one. If I go back here, I've named it appropriately. So this is flower set A1 master. Okay, so this is the master flower set. So I can go into this flower set. So I'm going to double click the prefab for this flower set. I'm going to open up my bases. I'm going to drag these out. Now, actually, you can see there, this is sort of up in the air like this. What I need to do is just turn on snapping. So I can see that this is going to need to be resized quite significantly. So let's just drag this so that it's approximately in the right location. That's just massive. And let's resize this. That looks okay, I think. That looks okay. We're going for like this has to be feasibly sort of made, you know, like constructed by hand. That actually looks pretty nice, actually. See that scale of the felt? Can you see it? Like the scale of the felt is pretty good at this size, right? It kind of looks like it could be felt. So I'm okay with that. So let's duplicate this. And I'm going to move it down here, line it up with this one. It took so long to get the distribution of these flowers to work correctly. Lots of trial and error. And what I don't want is I don't really want them all to be facing the same, exactly the same. So I'm just going to sort of have them slightly off like this. Okay, so that they're not all perfectly oriented. And let's grab this one and move it next to here, like so. These two are generally at the front, or they will be at the front, so let's have those as being slightly different, something like this. And maybe then that one at the back needs to be more like that. Okay, so they're all just slightly off, right? So now when I go back to my scene, you see every single flower now has those leaves on the bottom. All right, so I haven't had to place them all manually. Yeah, all I've had to do is kind of put them on the main master set and it will be copied through. I'm thinking they're probably a bit too big. What do you think? Just I'll jump over to OBS, but if they're too big, then just drop it in the chat and I'll resize them. Let's have a quick play. The master forms are not the ones that move, like they're not the ones that have the physics on them. So the leaves will not move, which is what I want. However, what I might do is add like a little bit of a springiness to them. Not entirely sure yet if I will do that. Okay. It's not too bad actually. It's a good size. I think it's just possibly just a touch smaller. I don't know. Okay, I think I'll probably make them a little bit smaller. So how am I going to do that in an efficient way? I don't want to be in the situation where each flower has got a slightly different size. So the best way for me to probably do this is actually just to do it in the flower leaf prefab, grab them all at the same time, just scale them inwards a little bit, like that. Very simple. Okay. Maybe a little bit more. Okay, that's probably looking a bit better, I think. I don't know. I mean, these kind of things, like you sort of want to exaggerate things a little bit as well. But yeah, I think that's looking okay. You could like vary them per flower, but I think that's probably okay. Let's just go back in and make them really big just to see what that looks like, because that's one thing that I haven't done yet, right? Is make them really big. Oh, hang on, is it not? Ah, right, okay, it's having a really slight effect on them. So what I actually do need to do is resize them in the master, I think, unfortunately. Like if we have them really big, like this, actually, it's like it doesn't look too bad there, look. It really fills the space really well. Yeah, I don't know. I'm kind of in two minds about it. Like there'd be different flowers with different sets of different widths of flower of leaves and stuff, you know. At this size, you can see the errors underneath as well, I think. Well, let's have a look at the game angle. Yeah, you can kind of see the errors, the little bits underneath. So that's something that I probably will have to fix actually at some point. Yeah. Wouldn't go any bigger. I've just made them really big. Good size, worth looking at options. Yeah, I quite like them this size, but I'm also aware that it kind of looks a bit ridiculous. Like it distracts a little bit from the flower heads. So I shall grab them all. And bring them back down like this. Okay, like so. Yeah, I think that's a good size, I think. And then, yeah, obviously I can just kind of make the adjustments within the base. So if I need to move these out a little bit, I wonder if this won't work, will it? No. Okay, so I'd actually have to move each one out individually. What I'm trying to do here is just correct as much of that kind of intersecting or clipping that I can. This won't fix it, but it might come reasonably close. Yeah, you can see it here, it's not quite right. It's just because the objects are going through each other, essentially. And the way you fix that is you're going to have to like rotate them out and do all that kind of stuff, which can be done. In reality, I've actually probably got one too many leaves here. You know, it should probably just be 4. Okay, let's go back. Okay, and now the problem is, of course, you get this little gap in the middle because you've had to separate them all out. So maybe that wasn't such a great idea. Oops. Just reset them all. You can't undo when you're working with prefabs. Well, you can, but not once you've exited. So you kind of have to go in and manually reset them. But the great thing is I can just change this whenever I want, and it's going to change all of these other things. So I don't need to commit to this just yet. I can just sort of play around later on. And yeah, obviously because these are prefabs, then I can just grab, whenever I want these, I can just grab them. And they're already going to have all the leaves on them and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, pretty cool. It's a good way of working. Okay, so I don't just have to use these for the flowers, right? I can use them for other things. So what I thought I'd play around with was using these to, just on their own, to sort of stick around as like little patches around the bases of trees. So I thought I'd have a go at creating some groups of things like this. And what I wanted to do also is create another object to use with these, like a little flower in the middle, or a little color. Like I'm imagining how would they be like here, these flowers, like if you were making this, then probably the green stem is like a pin, which kind of pushes through the felt and holds everything together. Here, they need a similar kind of thing to kind of pin them in place, right? So it could be a stitch. So we could use a stitch. I've got plenty of stitches. In fact, if I change the way I'm working quickly, just snap this over here like that. And let's grab a spare stitch. Is there one? Yeah, there's one there. Let me just duplicate that thread, drop it up here. So we could just use this thread potentially to kind of add that, looking like it's maybe been stitched into place like this. That contrast is really nice, you know, when you get the different colors just contrasting in that way. It gives you a really nice result. Yeah, that actually works quite well, actually, I think. The alternative was going to be to create a just a pinhead to kind of like contrast. Like one of the nice things about the scene at the moment is we've got all these this smattering of color, which is just these buttons that have been used around the scene to simulate flowers and weeds and sort of like meadow flower type things. And that hard surface contrast is really quite a nice effect. So that might work quite well as well. In which case, let's have a quick play around with that. We can actually create some variants of this. So we can actually make one with a stitch in the middle. In fact, let's prefab this one up. So let's get this one going. Snap this to the grid like this. I'll create an empty game object. This is the, what shall I call this? I'm not sure what these type of flowers are called. Yeah, they're sort of like cluster. They're not like weeds, aren't they? But yeah, I don't know. I'm just going to call it flower form A so that I can find it later. And I'm going to grab these objects and drag them into there. This is where if I had a bit more scene organization going on, this would be a hell of a lot easier. So there's my flower form 1 prefab. So I'm going to just drop them out here for now. Okay, so there's my flower form A. And then I'm going to reuse this like so. So I've actually got two of these on top of each other now. Let's turn off grid snapping. Okay, it's got this one here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to replace the thread with a sphere. So I'm going to create a 3D sphere. It's going to be massive because this is like 1 meter in size. So I could create a sphere in Maya, obviously, but there are some very basic primitive forms in Unity already, so there's absolutely no point in me using a sphere from Maya. The sphere in Unity is actually really really good. Like I was talking to my students about how good the Unity sphere was the other day. Like it's formed from a cube. It's been conformed to a true sphere, and the UVs, I have no idea how they did the UVs, but they're amazing. Right, so I'm going to delete this. Okay, so this is saying here like I can't do this to this object because this is a prefab. So what I'm going to do is I am going to unpack this prefab. So this is no longer a prefab. That's going to allow me to alter it. Then I'm going to have a sphere right in the middle here, like this. And where did that sphere go? Where are you? Oh, it's right at the bottom here. Somehow my flower leaf form has become disconnected, so what I'm going to do is just drag all that out again. I may as well just start from scratch, mightn't I? But it's absolutely giant. It doesn't matter too much. Because we vary the scale anyway, so the scale doesn't need to be uniform at all. If anything, we don't want it to be. So this now kind of hopefully looks like a little pinhead in the middle. So let's just grab our materials and I'm going to drag any plastic onto this pinhead. Maybe not a bright red. Let's maybe try something else. A yellow. It's a bit, overusing yellow and green at the moment. Maybe though, if this was like white like this, maybe that would kind of look interesting, right? So we've now got these different kind of, there we go, that's kind of cute. So I've now got I've got to grab this and drag this down as well. So I'm just grouping these together. In case you can't see it, I'm actually just grouping these together inside this new flower form. And I'm going to call this flower form B. Let's check that the center of this object is where I want it to be, and it is. And I'm going to drag and drop flower form B as a prefab. Cool. So I've now got these different flower forms, and I can go up here. And we have flower form B right there. I'm not sure what I did with flower form. Did I put it? I put it in my prefabs, didn't I? Let's just drag this out here. Yeah. And we've got a flower form here. And what I'm going to do is just create a little collection of these. Ignore it going through the button. We can fix that later on. In fact, let's just move it around to the side a little bit, somewhere like this. Okay, I'm going to use these to kind of like bridge the bottom of this tree. Like so. And just aid its transition into the rest of the landscape. It was actually looking quite good. I think they do look quite good. It all looks cohesive, right? But what we want to do is just create these little groupings of objects that kind of like hint that this hasn't just been stuck there. It's maybe been there a long time. I know that this is not like, we're not going for realism here, right? It's Knitties world. So it's like it's made of stuff. But yeah, it's quite fun to just think about how the scene would have been populated and like why the nature's in that particular location, that kind of thing. You know, this is the fun bit. So this is what we call scene population, which is where you start thinking about the story of the world, right? And then once I created one set of these, I can then reuse it over like multiple times in a modular fashion, right? And yeah, so let's grab this and drop this on the other side of here, and we just start building it out. You know, we're just building stuff. So, okay. I normally do these tech demos for an hour and then it's like Q&A for a bit, so I need to wrap this one up, unfortunately. But yeah, you get an idea of how we're kind of building stuff out and how you might go about building things, and some of the considerations you have to make in relation to building things for games. These prefabs are really cool as well because I can make certain changes, so I can go, well, you know what, I want to have these vary in material a little bit as well, so I can actually make changes to individual prefabs like this and not affect the others if I wanted to. But anything I do inside of the prefab will affect the others. So yeah, it's kind of quite neat. Let's give this one. Have I got a slightly different? That is the same one, I think. Have I got a blue or something? I've got lots of greens. Let's go with this. Right, so you can kind of vary up the content of these. So it looks like you've got tons of different things, but actually it's just the same thing used slightly differently each time. Right. And I think I'll scale this. Maybe the white flower needs to go down because it's quite high contrast. Anyway, so yeah, I mean, I need to work on all of this and kind of make these little arrangements, but essentially that's kind of the process that we're going through right now, is sort of starting to populate the world a little bit more and kind of make things gel together and stick together as if they're sort of like one cohesive game world, essentially. Notice also, like here, I'm making sure that I have things that overlap. Like things do not exist in isolation; they exist within worlds with other objects, and they occasionally overlap and intersect and all that kind of stuff. So, yeah, that's like really nice because the high contrast one kind of stands out there. And again, once I've done this, I can grab this and just to hammer home the point of all of this, I'm going to create another empty game object. It's dropped it over here. Let's turn on my snap settings. The grid point for these is, I think, is it there or is it there? It's there. Okay. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to grab these forms and I'm going to drag these into this new game object. And I'm going to call this flower. I should actually come up with a naming convention. Group A. I normally label things A, B, C when I'm not when I need to find them again, rather than 0, 1, 0, 2. So flower group A, and I'm going to turn this into a prefab. Okay, like this. So let's pull this out now, and let's snap this to that same location. But now what I can do is obviously rotate it, and now you start building out the scene like this. I can go, well, I need some of those on my other tree, so let's do this here. Snap those to the center of that one. Let's spin them around the other way, something like this. Kind of like this, like that. And now we've got these quite nice little forms around the bottoms of the trees. Okay, so I think time for the tech demo is up. Stitch looks like a little flower. Yeah, it's sort of like, Yeah, it does, doesn't it? And but bear in mind, like, look at this as well. So look at this the angle that we're at now. We can barely make those out, those little stitches. So I've got to think, well, you know what? Is it worth having those stitches if we can barely see them? Like, I could just have something like, I could make the pin heads a lot bigger, which they definitely do need to be. Like, the pin heads need to be bigger in this case, because if you look at the buttons, they're quite large. So actually I can exaggerate these quite a bit more. But yeah, they're quite pretty, you know, it's quite a cute little collection of things around the bottoms of the trees, and maybe this can trail off gradually. Like, you know, we can grab these forms and we can just scatter them. Sometimes this is called scatter, um, like about the scene. So let's just take that off like this. Go, duplicate this, spin them around a little bit, create some variation, create some random sizing. And then what I do is I group these kind of things together, right? And yeah, like suddenly, yeah, you've got this like quite rich populated world of all these different objects. And you haven't really had to do like a ton of work. You're just reusing the same thing efficiently. So you're working in a modular and efficient fashion. I quite like having groupings of these. So I tend to work in patterns of 3. You can blame. There's a concept artist called Feng Shu. One of the best concept art teachers I think you'll ever find. And he would always emphasize things like the rule of thirds, and the rule of 3, and having 3 objects, 3 of everything. I don't know why it's 3, but I always kind of like working groupings like that. So trying to make 3s less obvious. You know, you've got these obvious groupings of 3, like on the tree. So if you notice on the trees, you've got 3 large forms in any view, and in any view there are 3 buttons visible on each thing. There are also 3 different colors on each thing, of thread and of button. So from any view like this, you always get 3 buttons, 3 different colors of buttons, and you get 3 different colors of threads as well. So yeah, I like to work on that basis. So you can see this little area here now, we've got this kind of populated thing. And let's go through this process, right? We're going to create a new empty game object. We're going to grab all these flowers. Actually, I need to just position this game object correctly. Let's snap this. Where would the nearest snap point be? Okay, I'm just going to reconstruct it over here then. So I'm just going to grab these and position them kind of in the right place, I guess. Now, game object's there, so I would need to move all of these. Turn off snapping. Drop it there. There we go. That'll be fine. Drop these into the game object. Give this a name. Ground cover. A. And right, it hasn't named the game object. I meant to name the game object. Ground cover A. Prefab it like this, and now I can just pull this out. Oh yeah, so my grid point for this, I actually made a mistake with my location. You can see it's underneath. So let's just move this over here. Grab these here. I'm going to snap this down to there. And actually, this is probably why I was getting confused before. Is the yeah, there we go. That is better. When I make a change like that, I do need to just drag it back on to the game object to fix it. So now I'm going to pull this out here. Let's turn on snapping. It wants to snap just below the height of the floor for some reason. That's okay. That'll be an issue with the way that I've done it. So now obviously I can just sort of move this wherever I want any ground cover. Give it a bit of a spin to create some variation. And yeah, you can see how like the world would start populating very quickly with this kind of stuff. So yeah, we've now barely got any bare patches, which is kind of nice. Okay. Yeah. So you can see like, right, there's also a problem here. Now we've got to be careful when I'm looking at the Knitties world in this way, because the camera is actually a bit misleading here. The camera is not going to be this straight on. It is going to be positioned slightly over the Knitties head facing downwards. So like immediately I'm going, oh, hang on a second, these aren't actually facing the camera. But where the camera is actually going to be is going to be almost perpendicular to the facing of the flowers. So the flowers will almost be facing right into the camera. So that gives you an idea of where the camera is actually going to be. So here we're going, well, I can kind of see, I can't see the buds of the little, what are they called, clovers kind of. But when the camera is placed correctly, I will be able to do that. The reason the camera is not placed correctly at the moment is purely because this angle is great for screenshots. So that's purely why the camera is here at the moment. So there will be a slight change in the future around that. So in the scene view, you can kind of see a little bit more like how that might look. Okay, and it may well be that we go, actually, you know what, these are a little bit too much, you know, intersperse them with some buttons, you know, for the general ground cover, and then put a lot more color into them as well, you know. Okay, so that is the dev part of the stream over, I guess. I'll leave this up on the screen so there's actually something going on. But yeah, we normally do a Q&A at the end of these things. So if anyone's got any questions they'd like me to answer, then drop those in the chat. That would be awesome. Had a great meeting with Robin earlier. We've been working on a little something in the background with Adam and Federico. It looks pretty cool. And yeah, we're really hoping to get some interoperability going between our projects as well. So we've been discussing some potential opportunities to achieve that moving forward. This is probably going to be the last time you also see this OG Knitty. This is a non-HD Knitty in the game world at the moment. This is probably the last time you're going to see it. We're going to be moving to the HD model pretty soon, hopefully this week. We shall see. I've got a bit of a jam-packed week this week, so I'm hoping to be able to do it, but we shall see. So the scene population in here is deliberately dense, so don't worry. Like if you're going, oh, there's too much stuff going on there, yeah, it's not going to be this dense in the final version. This is purely for testing purposes. The idea eventually, Potatoes asked about, have I got any mail? Apparently I have. There's several boxes, parcels in there, but unfortunately I can't get them just yet. Something that we've been toying around with is and sort of like trying to figure out how it's going to function in game. We know how it will function technically, but functioning in as a useful game mechanic is that you'll be able to send people mail through the game, and it will be very simple mail. Like if you consider Dark Souls, which is, believe it or not, a massive inspiration for the Knitties world. It's you know, and Dark Souls is a Metroidvania, right? It's firmly in the Metroidvania genre. So spaces unlocking after you've completed certain things or you've gained certain abilities, that kind of stuff. Is Knitties going to be an RPG? Well, it might be, have RPG elements. But what we want to be able to do is send like messages to someone. So what you hopefully would be able to do eventually is either by using like your friend's wallet address, like if you know their wallet address or if you know their handle, you could send them an emote um, through the in-game mailing system, and then they will have mail the next time they log into the game, and they'll be able to see it. What we can also do is perhaps send things. So, like, it might be that you can send them something, an in-game item or something, that they can use, or maybe you plant something somewhere for them to find, or leave them a treasure chest. Those kind of ideas that we're sort of exploring at the moment. But the mailing system I thought was really, really nice. Obviously, another part of this that I did demo, like when I was first building out the world. This is when we were like having the old tree style, like the demo tree style. That was a bit more like Animal Crossing. Also did the multiplayer elements in there, so that's something that I'm really looking forward to getting implemented, whereby you can just invite one person into your world and it becomes like a social thing, like a social environment. I'm really excited to be able to do that. What's the next object to add? Yeah, well, next thing to add is going to be the new Knitty model, right? The latest, most up-to-date HD Knitty model, which is pretty high resolution. It's already pretty good, but it's going to be an even higher resolution, which is going to be awesome. But also, what I need to do then is build out an in-game class for the Knitty, which will enable him or her or them to be customized by the player. So that's what I need to do next, really, is build out what that looks like. And then it should be fairly straightforward to actually build out the customization options from there. So yeah, that's the next step. And I would like to get a few more trees in here as well before I start expanding the island space. I'm not too sure whether the alpha that gets made public, the next alpha that gets made public, will include a larger island than this. I think probably the community would expect something that's larger. So yeah, I'm kind of like the next alpha. I'm kind of interested in getting some really aesthetically pleasing screenshots from people, but also giving them the opportunity to test stuff, right? Like glitchy flowers, which we just saw then, right? Okay, like it's come back the wrong way and now it's disappeared. Oh my God, what's happening? They go like this. There we go. I can resolve this, but I quite like the freedom of movement that they have, which is unfortunately this is like a little side effect of that. Unfortunately, yeah. So being able to say, yeah, if you've got 3 trees in the scene and they say, oh, it's the tree that's on the right hand side that's got a problem, then it's easier for me to find that than if I have like 50 trees in the scene. Okay, so it's better for us to do really intense condensed testing when the world is smaller. So actually, I mean, to be honest with you, like it's pretty much ready to go for the next alpha thing. But I did say that I would aim to get a degree of Knitty customization going on. So that's what I would like to do next to get into it, and then we could probably release it as this and just get people to test it again. Because that's what we'd be interested in doing is people actually testing it and giving us feedback with quite a small range of things that could potentially that they can give feedback on. Right. Treasure hunt, see if we recognize the Dark Souls elements further down the line. Yeah, so one of them like was a glitch, I guess, wasn't it? In the boosters version of the what were we testing? We were testing the loader, weren't we? The policy ID thing. The one-click policy ID authentication. So yeah, what I'd done previously is I actually had multiple islands and you could like jump across to all of them all. And then I deleted them, but I didn't change the nav mesh. And I thought it was quite cool that you could just wander out into the world. There was actually multiple islands that you can potentially wander to if you find the exact point. So you can actually go quite far into the distance if you find the exact sort of pixel bits. But yeah, things like that's what the game I want it to be about discovery, right? So you're wandering around and you find things, and I really like that kind of sensation of when you're playing Minecraft and you kind of like you find something really amazing. You find some really amazing underground cave with a whole like village in it and all this kind of stuff. I think that's really rewarding. So it'd be great to be able to have that here. And of course, the great thing about not having unique game worlds, like we could procedurally generate like a unique game world for everyone. But the great thing about not doing that is that the community can participate in like community problem solving and all this kind of stuff. And I think that's really great as well. So yeah, that's something that we'd really like to achieve as well. Will the Knitties have idle animations? Yeah, there is actually one on there at the moment. I don't know if you can see it. It's very basic. This is all the early animation that we did just for blocking, right? So you can see it's very basic idle animation. I posted some stuff up about using motion capture, and all of the base Knitty animations will not be motion capture. They will be hand animated. If you've been keeping track of the Twitter, then you'll see. Then you'll sort of see some of the mocap being applied. And it's of course it's completely humorous because Knitties are this crazy sort of proportionally well, they're not humanoid. They're humanoid, but they are not human. So none of those animations really work in the way that they're supposed to. But they're certainly compatible with motion capture. But everything will be animated by myself, by hand, or potentially by the community. Like if the community were interested in contributing to the animation set of Knitties and just having a play around, that's why I've rigged it in the way that I have, and so that it's really easy to access. Love the idea of Knitties falling asleep. Yeah, I think they'd sort of like nod off and then just bounce on their backsides, I think, wouldn't they? Dances, yeah. Well, we got a dance. We got a nice. We got a dance to Gloria Gaynor on Twitter, which is quite amusing. When Cliff. So, I mean, the actual like. I mean, technically, this is a cliff, I guess. But when there are going to be multi-levels and all this kind of stuff, and yeah, this is just a flat-edged area. And what I would do is actually have like some rounded edged cliff type things. I've got to figure out how to do the cliff. I mean, this material that is applied here can obviously be, it's fairly flexible. So I can alter the pattern on this material fairly easily. So which one is it? It's in the rock pattern. And yeah, so I can just sort of like alter this to be whatever I want, really. Obviously, and I can change a few other characteristics about this as well. But ultimately, I would for actual rock, I would like to have potentially a different material on here. I was actually thinking of having some clays in here as well. So I was thinking that rocks could potentially be made out of plasticine or something. And that would be quite interesting because then that's another contrasting material, right? So in here at the moment, we've got like corrugated card. This is meant to be the outside of corrugated card, and then you've got the corrugations on the inside. We've got wood. We've got these. I still really love these bits, like these bits around the ends of the trees, like that have just been sewn on. I think those are really fantastic. We've got plastics. You know, so what other materials do people play with? You know, the design aesthetic is one that um, everything that's in the Knitties world needs to be able to be made by, you know, like a responsible adult and a young child, essentially. That's the idea, because yeah, that was the whole aesthetic of Knitties initially. So it'd be really awesome to be able to follow that through um, on like all of the assets that are in the game. You know, it would just be really fantastic. I'd absolutely love that. You know, you sort of have like real Knitty villages popping up and things like that. I think it's a really cool way to approach this type of project. Yeah, so that's potentially so like Matthew's just in there. You know, we could send toys in the mail. Yeah, so like you could get a quest item and you might be able to send it to someone. That would be quite interesting. I need to figure out how to do inventory or how I would like to handle inventory management. I'm not entirely sure how I am going to go about doing that. I mean, the actual management of it is fairly straightforward. You're just creating a list, you know, of stuff that the player has. It's just a case of like how you manage that in the game. But these are all things that are actually they're fairly trivial in terms of functionality, but they do require a bit of forethought. Will Nitties be able to skateboard to go faster? Um, so this is like, I don't know, is this one of the most asked questions? I think it is. Potentially, skateboarding is on the list of things, of which there are many, but it is not on the immediate list. It's quite a bit further down the line. I have this idea of Nitties being able to skateboard to go faster, but bear in mind not all Nitties do have skateboards, so you would need to have a Nitty with a skateboard to be able to get a skateboard in the first place. Um, but yeah, ideally, that's something that we want to be able to do. So, like, you're running through the world, and then you hit the left L2 button, and maybe it just pulls a skateboard out and jumps onto it and skates, you know, something like that. Um, Potentially, yeah, it's on the list anyway. It's not something that I'm considering at the moment. However, that said, the newer version of the controller that I've developed will work quite easily with that. So yeah, potentially, it could it should happen eventually. Yeah, bearing in mind that this is like we're firmly in alpha phase right now, and the next alpha will be 0.0.4, 0.0.4. Okay, so that's where we're at with things currently. Actually, no, the alpha. No, we're changing it because it's the next phase of the alpha, so it'll be 0.1.0. That'll be the next alpha. Freestyle points leaderboard for skateboard. Um, yeah, we'll see. We'll see. We are using like a real, like rigid body sort of object for the Nitty, so I just need to figure out how to handle that. But you know, it's definitely possible. Okay, we just got a couple more minutes left, so we'll hang around a little bit and see if there's any other questions. There were a few other things I've made notes of that I was going to talk about, but I don't think I've remembered them. Which is why I made notes, but the notes aren't here. So going to do a few like conifer type trees. So I'm going to do three main trees for the next set of work, for the next body of work that's going to be completed. Obviously, we've got this tree. There's going to be a sort of like a pine tree type thing. And there will be a square blocky tree as well. Um, Bram has just asked when Google Docs assets. Um, Interestingly, I created this whole system using Google Docs where I could actually use Google Docs to update the game. So it might be that there are narrative elements that are stored in the Google Docs. things like dialogue components and all that kind of stuff, because it allows me to update them really, really easily. So I can just pull in different Knitties responses via the Google Docs, and if I want to add to its list of responses, I can just do it in the Google Docs spreadsheet. So there might actually be some Google Docs assets at some point. Will there be bees flying around? The answer to that is yes. Again, it's on the list. It's when I say it's on the list, bees flying around is not specifically on the list. What is on the list is AI creatures that are not Knitties, and some of those creatures are potentially companions. Bees probably won't be, but certainly there will be bees flying around, yeah. Eventually. They'll be quite big as well. They're not going to be small bees, they'll be big bees. Just like, you know, what was the bee called? I can't remember what we called it, but yeah. There's mini bee. Oh, it's just bee and mini bee, wasn't it? Yeah, okay. And the mini bee made it into S1s because the promo card had 2 bees on it. So we just thought, well, why not have 2 bees on as the extras as well? One of them's got a green label, hasn't it? One of them's got a green label, one of them's got a red label. So you imagine like you maybe have a companion character like I don't know, I wonder what a good name would be for these companion characters. Maybe something to do with pets or something. Okay, so it's been 1.5 hours. So thank you everyone for coming along this evening. Hope you've learned a little bit maybe about 3D modeling and getting stuff into a game engine and the kind of workflows that we might use in a game engine. The next one will be in probably another 2 weeks' time. And I'm not sure what I'm going to cover for that. So just, if you've got any specific ideas around that, then feel free to drop a comment or hit us up on the Discord or Twitter or whatever. I think at that point I will probably be animating. So animating in Maya might be quite an interesting one to do, I think, because then I can make the rig available and people can have a play around with animating it. Franken-Knitties walking around. Final question. Will there be Franken-Knitties walking around? So there will certainly be some characters that are Frankensteins, right? Those black label ones. And maybe those Knitties have a special animation so they themselves can Franken-Knitty around. But we could have, you could have story events, like events in game where maybe eventually all the Knitties turn into zombie versions and all their animations turn to zombie walks, and you have to correct the situation, that kind of thing. Okay, so anyway, that's that. So hopefully you've learned something. A pleasure as always, and thank you very much for coming along, and hopefully I'll see you next time.